So of course, a very good day to all those of you who are tuned in on our Facebook pages, and very shortly you'll be able to capture this also on the EPA's Facebook page. It gives us great pleasure to come to you from the offices of the EPA, or the Environmental Protection Office, here in Sophia, where we are having a panel to discuss the collaborative efforts to mitigate noise nuisance, which I am sure most of us in Guyana are aware of, but in many cases are not necessarily aware of where we're erring and what it takes to be able to reduce that so that we will not affect others and we will continue to have a society that is lawful. I've got with me on this panel, let me take the first off to introduce from the EPA side, the Senior Environmental Officer and Head of Complaints, who is none other than Mr. Suraj Paul Singh. We've got the Legal Officer for the EPA, Ms. Sharifa Parks, the Senior Environmental Officer and Head of Technical Services, Tashana Redmond. Very good morning to you all. And of course, we've got on the police side, Deputy Commander for Regional Division Number 3, Mr. Khalid Mandel, certainly no stranger to those of you on the police Facebook page. Woman Superintendent of Police, the officer in charge of Court Suit for Region 4A, none other than Michelle Daniels. And we've got Woman Sergeant and the manager of the Juliet Griffith Daycare Center, Miss Kenny Haney. Very good morning to you all.
Good morning, Stan.
All right, so first off, if we talk about noise nuisance, that is the catch term that we're dealing with. What is, and if we to ask from the EPA side, and maybe you can, as the Senior Environmental Officer and Head of Complaints, what could be termed as, first and foremost, noise, and then secondly, nuisance?
All right, so generally, noise is defined in its simplest term as any unwanted sound, right? And there are several sources of noise. You can get noise from bars, churches, musical equipment, industrial activities, and so on. So the minute those activities cause an annoyance to someone, right, I think we would class that as a nuisance, right? So basically, in simple terms, I think that is noise and what is being defined as a nuisance. Tashana Redmond here also could add, because she is somewhat involved in testing and measuring noise. So maybe she can add a bit as well.
Right. As Suraj Paul would have pointed out, noise is any unwanted sound, right? Any unwanted sound. So noise is a part of our everyday lives. Even in the stillness, we might hear a leaf fall, you know, so noise is present within our environment. Noise becomes a nuisance when the sound is unwanted, and more so when it's above allowable limits. Those constitutes nuisances, disturbances, and affect the quality of life of people everywhere.
You made mention of the allowable limits.
Yes.
And there is talk about also whether it's industrial or even the more popular thing that persons would report from time to time to the Guyana Police Force would be the situations where it's mostly
Residential.
Wash bays,
the wash bays,
motor vehicles,
or even you know, sound systems
neighbors and so on.
and that kind of thing.
Yes.
So I rather suspect that there are allowable instances or limits to each of those. If you can break down for us what those would be.
So I'm glad you pointed that out, because we need to understand that noise is very present, but we need to be able to manage the noise we are emitting. So if you are operating within a residential area, whether you're having a party, you've got a little small business in your area, we reference the wash bay, you need to know what the limits are. And the limits in a residential area is 75 decibels during the day and 60 decibels at night, right? Decibels are the unit in which we measure noise. So once you are operating within any area, particularly, and you mentioned there are 3 primary areas where noise are of a concern: in our residential areas, our commercial areas, and the industrial areas. Industrial areas have high limits. They go up to 100, because generally persons in those areas are expected to be making noise and noise at high levels. In those instances, persons who are exposed to the noise are generally protected. You go to an industrial site, there's lots of noise, you see people with earmuffs, right? That's protecting their exposure. Within a residential area, persons are not being protected from noise exposure, so it means therefore that the noise has to be managed. The limits of 75 decibels ensure that persons are not exposed to noise above 85 decibels, which prolonged exposure can lead to hearing loss and cause other impacts on human health.
As it relates to the protection, that speaks to those who are evidently employed within those areas.
Occupational exposure.
The occupational exposure. What about if it is that it happens to be in a location where persons reside? How are they protected?
They are not. And that is exactly why we're collaborating with the Guyana Police Force. Because many times persons are being exposed to noise above the permissible limit, and sometimes above 85 decibels, which can impact their health and well-being. You know, it can lead to sleep deprivation. So given the number of complaints we both receive annually, we have entered into a relationship whereby we're seeking to improve the quality of life for all Guyanese, particularly as it relates to managing noise and their exposure to noise pollution.
Deputy Commander, evidently a collaboration such as this with the EPA speaks to the Guyana Police Force. Must be able to have certain prerequisites in place for the one, investigation, and 2, prosecution of some of these. What would be some of those things that you would see as definite resources that the force is making sure that it is readying itself with in being able to tackle this problem?
Yeah, good morning once again, Stan. As you are aware, in May of this year, the EPA and the Guyana Police Force, we signed a memorandum of agreement, which both agencies decided to tackle this noise problem, this noise nuisance problem together. So we, due to the number of complaints we receive yearly, we see it as being a problem. In the sense the citizens them are complaining of other people who are not being responsible and are creating noise nuisance. Now, some of the agreement we have with the EPA is that we will have training for our ranks at the various divisions in terms of using their noise level meters, and we'll have training in terms of the EPA Act, how we are going to assist them in enforcing their act. Because we recognize that when we charge people under the Summary Jurisdiction Offences Act, 8:02, the fine for forced conviction is very small. It's 7,500 to 10,000 and to 15,000, and for the second offense is 10,000 to 20,000. Under the EPA Act now, the fine is much heftier. It starts at 80 to 750,000. So with us getting that act, we can enforce that act. That will be a deterrent in itself to people who have no self of responsibility. They don't have no care for their neighbors. Because you and I both know, students who are studying for exams, elderly persons who are in their home, persons who have heart problems, etc., noise nuisance affect them adversely. And this is a step in the right direction so we can tackle this problem as dual agencies.
While I hear that, evidently some members of the public will say that there seems to be a breakdown in communication somewhere because they have been allowed to own and operate certain businesses in certain areas, and then persons are now complaining about noise nuisance. What can be done to mitigate such?
One of the problems that we are facing is that in certain areas, especially residential areas, they're not supposed to have certain type of businesses in those areas. So we have to engage other stakeholders to enforce what type of business can be built, right, in those areas, especially zoning. Different types of zones for different types of businesses. For example, you can't have a nightclub in a residential area because it would adversely affect people who live in around that nightclub, especially the nightclub if their sound equipment is not soundproofed. So this collaboration.
And just before you go, maybe if I could ask the people from EPA to maybe tackle this. So let's just say in a residential area, there is a nightclub. There is an investment of someone. The first thing they're thinking is that they're creating jobs, and now you're targeting them. What would you recommend to them, or would you try to have them put in place to be able to not be a nuisance to their neighbors?
So I just want to highlight that this is an opportunity for us to interact with the public, to bring them up to speed on the actions we plan to take and are taking to manage noise. But to get to the meat of the matter which you pose, we recognize that this is an issue. And one of the ways that can be managed is considering your impact at the start of your project, during your project right now, and putting in place appropriate measures to manage the noise. So if you are within a residential area and you have your nightclub, you need to look at, one, soundproofing your facility. You need to manage your equipment you have so that the capacity would not exceed what is suitable for such an area. You need to be responsible and make investments in monitoring equipment, right? And we have on display our noise meter. And if you own a facility that is producing noise, you should also be making an investment in a noise meter so that you can continuously monitor your emissions and ensure that you are within the levels. It is not impossible for certain activities to be within a residential area. It, however, has to be managed and managed appropriately. Many Guyanese travel overseas and they are exposed to different infrastructure that demonstrate how noise is managed. We need to bring that sort of infrastructure and investment locally so that we all can coexist in a manner that the business thrives and the people survive.
One of the complaints that come, and I'm sure as the court suit, it might be an argument that you hear from time to time in cases where you have to prosecute, is that in some instances, especially when it comes to, let's say, the bugbear of nightclubs, that the nightclub owner or owners are saying it is not their problem, it is patrons who take to the streets in the environs and they turn on music in their motor vehicles, disturbing neighbors, which is out of their purview because the person is no longer within their nightclub. How can this be tackled? And we've seen some of that happen indeed. For example, there have been some nightclubs, by the time they close, some people decide that they still want to party. So they ignore the fact that it's in a residential area and they take the party to the streets. So in the wee hours of the morning, neighbors then are harassed with loud noise to wake them out of their sleep.
Good morning again. Good morning, Stan. What you would have raised is some very important as well as crucial points. Now, noise nuisance becomes everybody's business, just like any other pandemic or pollution. Now, what I would say to the residents out there is encourage them to call the police hotlines. I know for sure that patrols within my region is working tremendously at tackling this noise nuisance pollution. And even if it is not a club and the police comes up and you're caught, you will be charged. But as it relates to, as Mr. Mandel would have said earlier, in working in collaboration with the EPA, is actually to try as much as possible on the police standpoint to mitigate this noise nuisance issue. Now, the thing of it is that, as you would have highlighted earlier, when you're charged under the Summary Jurisdiction Offences Act, the magistrates have a discretion. Some of them bond them, some of them fine as much. Recently, one of them would have been placed with a fine of 40,000, which would have been good. But now in the coming into contact with the EPA Act, it would surely serve as a deterrent, not only to the nightclub owners or business owners, but residents who from time to time tend to believe that even though you have a right to your enjoyment, it must be to the detriment of the sick, the elderly, and your fellow citizens and neighbors. So we're coming after you wherever you are, whether you're driving a minibus, whether because from time to time these motor cars, they're on the road, right? And I encourage my colleagues out there to start taking the bull by the horn, right? They are these big bazookas, I would call them, in these vehicles, and they turn these things to the window. So when you're caught in traffic, it becomes a whole pandemic, right? It affects you mentally, psychologically, and emotionally, because you're getting in from work, you're already stuck in traffic, and there are these music. Only this morning on Garden program, I would have been preview to a woman that would have complained about a certain bus driver, where she would have asked to turn on the music, and he would have refused. So now this is a good move as it relates to this memorandum of agreement. So actually, we will be seeing more with the collaboration and the collaborative effort and enforcement coming out from the EPA as well as the police. I am happy to say that there is a noise nuisance management committee appointed by the Guyana Police Force. I happen to be a part of that committee. The committee is being led by an assistant commissioner, and you have about 4 superintendents on the team. So we will be going after each and every patron. Ranks are continuing to be trained by the EPA as it relates to the use of the noise level meter, and then I will be there as it relates to the prosecution aspect to assist with the leading of these within, because I know from time to time that will be another issue that we will be faced with. But the legal officer on behalf of the EPA and the Guyana Police Force, we are working towards getting as fast as possible this on stream. At least I know with all the festive seasons and the CPLs and everything, even though everybody have to enjoy themselves, at the same time we have to cater for the vulnerable who are senior citizens and the sick. Then you have the school children, as highlighted by my colleagues on the panel. So that is it from me.
Good. We will come back to you about prosecution, because I'm quite sure EPA would like to see some of that is up also. But as you made mention about the vulnerable and being in charge of the daycare where their children, the school area obviously, not just the daycare at the Guyana Police Force, but if you were to speak to schools across the country, or where children are who are considered vulnerable during the time of studies or learning, noise impacting or affecting them. And if you are to maybe advise and address a little bit, because one of the things that was raised about minibuses is the issue of a lot of these what they call the boom boxes. One of the retorts that come oftentimes from owners of those vehicles is that this is what helps to generate income for them. If they do not have the boom boxes, then the young people, the ferry kids, the school children will not join their minibuses, and they may be on the park for hours before they get passengers. So they do this to be able to get passengers. It is what they like. How can we tackle this?
Good morning, Stan. I just don't agree with those, some of those minibus drivers or conductors who would want to make that clean, because actually noise can have a very negative effect or impact on kids. It can lead to confusion. It can disturb your day. It doesn't give you any order, but it's not just the noise, it's the high level of noise. Noise is okay. You can have a little music when you're going to work or you're traveling in the minibus, that is okay. But when the noise is excessive, it's very high, it can have a negative effect on those kids. So when they get into the schools, instead of you concentrate on the next activity or the lesson being taught, you're unable to do that because sometimes you're still feeling that little boom. You're still vibrating, sometimes it's so loud, right? So contrary to what they're saying, of course they're gonna want to support their claim, but contrary to that, the study says that it has an adverse effect on those kids. So if they are looking at that interest, they should turn down the music and maybe play something softer so that the children will be able to learn. Another point that they forget to mention is that in terms of the residential areas where you have these nightclubs coming up, now some of these nightclub owners have kids and the neighbors have kids too. And you're forgetting that sometimes when you play that music, that child is unable to get adequate sleep. Now when they're unable to do so, they can't rest properly. So when they wake up in the morning, the children, they're irritable and you wonder why. They weren't able to sleep properly. Then you force them out to school, they catch the boom boom bus, they disturb again, and then they're left with the teachers. Then they upset the teachers because they didn't get the rest that they would have needed. So sometimes you need to look at it from your own point of view. Do you want your children to learn? How does this impact my child? My child needs X amount of rest when the night comes, and when I play this music, it disturbs them. So maybe if they look at it from that point of view, not only our kids, we got the elderly, the sick, the young, the mother with the young baby, maybe now she can get a little short eye. If we can consider those things, especially in the residential area, I think that would help to mitigate or help them to maybe turn down or comply with the noise level that is supposed to have in those areas.
Just before we come to enforcement and some of the issues of that, joining our panel is Superintendent Martin Taylor. And Mr. Taylor, welcome to the program. But if you can give, particularly since I'm aware that you spent some time in Region 1, which is considered more of a rural area, how has the impact of noise nuisance been dealt with in such a region during your time there? And what are some of the recommendations you would have for the public?
Well, Region 1, like what we call the rural divisions, they have held their own. Nice nuisance enforcement, among other law enforcement activities, have been ongoing with favorable results. The problem is not per se a significant one in the regions, but being an outlying region, I can speak of. The problem is manageable at this time. The recommendations that is across the board is that provision of training for the use of the sound level meter, among others, in order for the ranks to be on par with their counterparts in the focus regions. This training and enforcement and subsequent enforcement is part of the Force Trust in conjunction with the memorandum of agreement that we signed with EPA. So it would be across the entire length and breadth of the Guyana Police Force. So they will get their training, they will have access to it, and they too will, sometime in the forthcoming future, will have to provide returns on their enforcement also, as is expected from the focus regions. So they are looking forward to this initiative in order to bridle the problem, control the problem.
Any one of the police representatives on this panel, can you say if there have been situations where reports or complaints coming into stations were mischievous in nature to a business, to a residence, simply because I didn't like her or I don't like him, so I'm going to report them? Or you find maybe the flip side could be also that, yes, a report is made, but by the time the police get there, there is no noise that is being made. Do you find situations like that?
Yes, as Mr. Taylor just said, yes, Stan, and it is much more prevalent in Fori. From time to time, you would find reports coming in, and by the time the patrols are dispatched, the music is either turned off or it's turned down, and by the time the police left, you might get another call, the music is turned off. And in cases where it may become suspicious that it is mischievous complaints, investigations are also conducted and carried out, and the relevant statements are taken, and the matter is forwarded to DPP. One way or the other, advice is given to proceed either against the complainant or the reporter, wherever the chips fall. So from time to time, you would find mischievousness. Persons would call if, for some reason or the other, sometimes the business may not have even been operating at the time when they call, but the police have a duty, and that is a legal duty, to respond to each and every report and report accordingly. as it relates to what their findings are.
Anything that?
Yes, our next problem that we are facing across the country, Stan, especially with the police side, is that persons will call in and they would make a report of noise nuisance. The patrol will turn up. We carry on the perpetrator to the station, seize his equipment, and we call the person to come the next day to give a statement. And they don't want to turn up to give a statement. They're refusing to give the statement for us to take the matter to the court. Now, one thing I like about the collaboration with EPA, with the training of our ranks to use the noise level meters, we won't have to rely on the person giving statement. We can rely on the reading of the noise level meters and the police statement who's taking that noise level. So even if a neighbor is reporting against a next neighbor and they want to maintain a good relationship, they don't want to give a statement, the police who is responding now to this noise nuisance report take along his noise song level meter, and they can measure the emittance, and once it's over the recommended decibels, they can write the statement and have the matter prosecuted. We are not now relying on the complainant to do that. So I'm looking forward for our ranks to be trained, and we are looking forward to be issued with the noise level meters so we can effectively and efficiently combat this problem. Because as you are aware, every one of us, we have constitutional rights. You have a right to enjoy yourself, but not to the expense of your neighbor, or not to the expense of persons passing by. So this collaboration is a win-win situation, not only for EPA and the Guyana Police Force, but for the entire country.
Public at large.
Awesome. And this is where I want to bring in EPA, the EPA side of things right now, because evidently with new methods and with the collaboration that we speak of, there are those who are going to be suspicious that they're going to be targeted. So obviously there must be some sort of education so that they can understand what their rights, what their responsibilities are. What are some of those things that you are putting in place so that the public will be aware? For example, the noise meter that a policeman will now come with. Some people may tell themselves, well, they're suspicious that they might be able to want to give them a reading that is going to be one for them to be prosecuted. How can you mitigate against such thoughts?
All right, so how can we manage that? One, we have been, I should highlight that we've been training police officers in the use of the sound level meter since 2017. So from regions 2 to 10, minus regions 8, 9, and 1, we have police officers that have already been trained in our, what we call our noise management course for police officers. And during those sessions, we train them on how to use the sound level meters. Now, the sound level meter is a piece of scientific equipment that requires calibration and maintenance. If an officer, a rank from the Guyana Police Force, or an officer from the Environmental Protection Agency shows up with a sound level meter, be assured that that meter has been calibrated. Right? It will be set up at the appropriate distance away from the source of the noise, because there is a guidelines for noise emissions into the environment that will guide data collection. So the standard says that it should be 50 feet or 15 meters from the source or at the boundary, whichever one is closer. So those steps need to be followed by the rank or the officer that is collecting data. The meter should be mounted and allowed to run at least for 15 minutes. and that data will be reflected on a chart. So if the officer arrived and was able to discreetly set up and start taking measurements, and then goes into the establishment to indicate that we have received a complaint and we're investigating, and the operator turns down the volume, it will all be reflected on the data sheet, right? So with training and exposure, the complainant, the polluter, and the monitoring officer can rest assured that the data collected will be objective and not subjective, right? And that eliminates that it's because they don't like me, they're complaining, right? Because we recognize these things are real, but one, according to our noise management regulations, persons have a right to complain. And as my colleagues from the Guyana Police Force said, we both have the right to investigate, right? The measurement of noise will ensure that we do that effectively. Because when we do the noise management training, we often give the example that what might be noise to somebody is just fine for another person. It's generally linked to what you're hearing, right? So Sunday morning, I'm hanging up my clothes and, you know, somebody's playing Easy Like Sunday Morning. It's a good feeling, right? As compared to some other lyrics which may not be as soothing and calm as Easy on a Sunday morning. But whether it is Easy on a Sunday morning or some other vibe, it still needs to operate within a limit. And when we go and we measure that noise emission, we'll know whether or not it's above the limit.
And I would like to add to that, Stan. The police officers who will be trained will also be gazetted. So they will be...
So gazetted ranks who will be going into these?
No, there will be ranks who are trained, they will be gazetted so they can give evidence in court. My colleague, maybe she can touch more on it as a court prosecutor.
Yes, when Mr. Mandel referred to gazetting, it means that you're certified to use these machines. It's just like the breathalyzer. Before you can give the evidence pertaining to that, you have to be trained and certified. So the persons to properly certify these officers is the EPA to ensure that you receive the requisite knowledge and training in the use of these materials.
And that you're competent.
And you're competent enough to operate them. And then that list will be forwarded to the relevant persons, to the AG and so on, and they will ensure that it's officially documented. So it would, defense counsel would not come to court and indicate, well, this rank is not competent enough to give the evidence, because the rank would be gazetted, it will be published for everyone to have knowledge of it. And that is one way to go. And just to add a little more to what would have been said by Ms. Mandel and Madam. There are programs that both the Guyana Police Force as well as the EPA would have agreed upon, basically we would have been attending meetings, the management team appointed by the Guyana Police Force. So we thought it best after our meeting that there's a need for sensitization, education, and advice together with recommendations that should have alluded to, in whereby persons might not be acquiring, businesses or places or on, let us say, working towards opening or establishing some club or pub somewhere within a residential area. So there is the need, as Mr. Mandel would have indicated, to collaborate with more or less the engineers in these NDCs to ensure that these buildings are properly equipped before that license should be issued for such that it should be fall within the EPA requirement as soundproof and so on.
Awesome. EPA, for those existing businesses especially in, let's say, residential areas, is there any, what we would call leeway or grace period for persons or business owners to be able to then come up to speed with what is required in being able to reduce noise nuisance and be in compliance with what the Act currently obtains? Do you give them a grace period, or it is from the day there's a complaint you start prosecuting?
Good morning again, Mr. Stan, and to our viewers. That's a very good question. One of the things is that the agency, due to its mandate, every time we receive a complaint, we don't just go with the hammer right away. So what we do is we seek to investigate, because one thing that's important is that you need to distinguish a valid complaint in those instances. So once we receive a complaint from a complainant, we do the necessary investigative process. We go in, we communicate with the alleged polluter, and we try to engage them, and we say to them, these are the necessary measures you can put in place to mitigate the noise, or so on. So that's one thing we, as I said before, we don't go in with a big stick approach, because that helps no one. So we go in, we say, these are the measures the EPA is recommending, and we seek to work along with the alleged polluter. Because as you stated earlier, there's a lot of investment in some areas, and it's important to say publicly that the EPA is not in charge of zoning, and that's important. What we're doing, we're here to mitigate the noise complaint as it relates to the environment. So that's our mandate, and that's what we focus on. So when we go in, we seek to say, these are the mitigating measures that you can implement, and we work along. We don't get ready. We only go to prosecute, should I say, if, you know, in Guyana terms, somebody's stubborn, they're not willing to implement, and we would have extended all the necessary process or how to assist them in getting those things in place. And when we're at our ends with, then we say, okay, once we have the relevant evidence, which is important, we then proceed to prosecute in those instances. And having the head of complaints who is more in the field, he could give you a little more how we usually deal with alleged polluters in those instances.
Yeah, so
And even to elaborate a little bit on what Court Sue talked about, maybe some of those, if you want to call it, address how you deal with some maybe prank or malicious complaints also.
yeah, so to add to what Ms. Parks would have mentioned already, is that when we receive these complaints and we do our investigation, we do, in most cases, provide a timeline to persons, right? Because most times we would recommend interim mitigation measures, and we have to make a distinction here, because persons, sometimes they receive our letter thinking it's an approval to operate or to do your business within an area, right? But the letter basically just provides guidelines or interim mitigation measures for you to put in place so that your operation or your facility will not create a nuisance. So timelines are given, right, based on the severity of the issue. Again, we can go a second time. The timeline can be extended. If we go and see that you're actually putting systems in place, right, we can extend your timeline. However, if we show and you're not doing anything or you're not implementing anything, then we have other means that we can go. One, we can do a prohibition notice where we stop you from operating the activity, and we ensure, we work with you to ensure that you have all the systems in place. Now, to the point with the prank calls, we do receive quite a few of those as well at the agency, right? And one thing that we do when we receive our complaints is that we do a thorough screening, right? So when we receive a complaint, it is recorded, right? We put it in our database, right? And then we try to gather additional information, right? So we may reach out to the complainant, find out exactly what is going on, We do our spot checks. We even sometimes rely on the NDCs who are actually within the area. So they can do what is called like an initial inspection for us, provide us with the information, and then we also act. But there are cases whereby we show up, we get all the information, but when you show to the place, nothing is happening, right? So we do receive that, and persons out there, some of them might be, you know, I don't know how to put it, but they can be somewhat mischievous, right? So we are urging persons, if you are seriously affected by noise nuisance, right, reach out to both agencies. You can reach out to the Guyana Police Force, you can reach out to the EPA, and we will have your matter addressed. But just to add also, with our MOA, right, which was signed in May, right, we would have already started a series of enforcement activities with the Guyana Police Force. So we're committed to reducing noise nuisance across the country. Hence, we would have started our enforcement exercise against bars, right? And we would have started on the East Coast in collaboration with Division 4C, right? So we're working our way across the country. So persons have to understand that we can't be in all the areas at one time. So we have to work our way up, and we're identifying hotspot areas and problematic areas. So East Coast has been identified, East Bank, Georgetown, Region 3, and so on. So we are working collaboratively with the Guyana Police Force to address these concerns. And during the weekends, you will see officers out at various bars addressing noise concerns, as well as during the week as well. So, yeah.
If you can,
Just to add to what the CEO would have just highlighted there, I wish to remind members of the public and citizens that there is systems in place if you need to keep a birthday party or a wedding and all these things. You need to apply well in advance to the police for permission to use noise equipment or music system or what the case may be. Even though you may have a bar license to operate the bar, you still need the permission of the police, right? So you can't say, well, you have your license and you can disturb the people for nowadays and all of that. You have to follow the law.
I choose to ask this question. Someone actually sent us whilst we were having the live, which they consider, you know, and it is a pressing issue for those who are watching, is kudos first and foremost for this kind of collaborative effort between the two agencies. However, the Guyana Police Force would take a lot of beating up from time to time for its, what appears to be its inaction of reports being made. But persons are saying, what about if, when the person comes to that location to test the noise, whoever is the owner of, whether it's a bar or whether it's a business, they decide to turn down to the prescribed limit. And then when the police leave, it's full throttle again. So anytime the police come, they're always seen as having the prescribed, within the prescribed limit. Then what happens is that we oftentimes see people go on social media and say that, oh, the police are perhaps maybe taking bribe, or this is their friends, or they're not doing what they're supposed to do. How do you propose that we tackle this?
Well, that's a pretty good question. And to say that's not a challenge faced by the Guyana Police Force alone, it's also faced by the EPA. So one of the things we have started to do is that when we come into an area and we see that the person's operating in the prescribed level, we continuously monitor, and that's important. And in some monitoring, people may know the word, sting operation. We may come in without informing the alleged pollutant. We try to take data because that's important. Because there's a spirit, especially in the Guyana society, there's the presumption of compliance. Once the enforcer, the authority is there, you tend to comply, and as soon as my back is turned, you're out there doing the opposite. So that's, as I said before, that's a really good question. We continue to monitor, and that's what the collaboration, the training is all about. How to mitigate noise pollution or noise nuisance. And it's the ability to monitor that situation from the start to the end. And we're not only going to come in and inform the alleged polluter we're here, because we're going to cater for the fact you're going to turn down. There are going to be occasions we're going to come, pull up without you knowing. We're going to take the data, we're going to come in and inform those polluters to say, you've been in breach of the regulation or the permissible levels. And then we proceed to say, these are the mitigating measures. And as stated earlier, it is when you fail to implement those mitigating measures that we go to prosecute on those occasions.
And just to add also, while Sharifa said that most times, right, we try to gather the data discreetly, so persons won't have the opportunity to turn down, right? And we sometimes we even show up in probably regular clothes, and probably go as normal civilian, right?
So it's not just always overt, but covert also.
Definitely,
Yes,
definitely. So yeah, because the last enforcement exercise that we had, right, we had officers blending in a sense, with the bars, right? And we had another team setting up equipment for the way to generate or to gather those data, right? And also we need to emphasize that when we gather data, it's not something that is going to happen one time only, right? Because sometimes we show up, you're playing your music at normal level, right? We will probably visit your operation or visit the complaint probably 2 or 3 times to get additional information to make a decision. So it's not that we're going to just show up, take a reading. If it's below the limit, we tell you, you're fine, you can go ahead and play your music. We're going to come, we're going to continuously monitor your operation. That's why we want the police on board, because the patrol ranks are on the ground most of the time, so they can also do additional monitoring for us. Yeah.
Mr. Mandel made mention of the EPA Act, which has sought to increase what the fines or the penalties are. How much of a deterrent do you see this is for those defaulters? And would you make recommendations that there may be other penalties beside a fine? There are, for example, I'm sure some businesses who might say, well, yeah, they made that within a night so they can afford to pay that for whatever. So they don't mind paying that fine. But some small businesses, yes, it could definitely be a deterrent. What are some of the other cases you put in place?
Well, not only is there a fine attached, there's actually a mandatory imprisonment of 1 year. So unless you're comfortable, in the prisons, I assume that it is a deterrent in several occasions, because while people may say, I can afford to pay a fine, the fine ranges from the 80,000 to about 300, 750,000. So I don't know which proprietor would be willing on every occasion to maybe take out 100,000 and 300 every night he's in breach. So looking at the fact that the fines are a little more steep and the mandatory penalty, which is imprisonment, I think a lot of times individuals will be willing to cooperate with the agency and the Guyana Police Force in implementing the necessary measures in combating noise nuisance. Because I usually say that a proprietor does not necessarily lives at his establishment. And would he like, while he's home taking a rest, his neighbor to be blazing music? I think that would be a whole different scenario. So it's all about people being conscious of the fact that everyone is entitled to their comfort. And this comfort is not only my comfort, but it's comfort across the board. Everyone's comfort is important.
So as you did mention, Court Superintendent Mr. Mandel and Mr. Zor, Mr. Taylor, sorry. This act under which persons will be charged is more the preferenced one than the Summary Jurisdiction Act, which is very punitive at this point in time. Do you have pushback, maybe in cases that are current or that more recent, where persons prefer to be charged under the Summary Jurisdiction Act, and even maybe from their legal representation, so that they could wiggle out of what the EPA Act stipulates?
Currently, son, if I may speak, as it relates to this EPA Act, currently we're working towards, the Guyana Police is working towards getting the authority from the EPA to give us the right to charge under their act. Because as you would have known, that the EPA is an independent body, whereas the Guyana Police Force is another organization that is independent of the EPA. So we cannot just charge using the EPA Act until certain systems are put in place, such as, I would suggest the fastest way for us to at least start charging persons is once the minister through the AG and so on grant us a fee, whereby it gives the police prosecutors the power to prosecute on behalf of the EPA using our act, using the EPA Act, as opposed to the Police Act. Now, when this is finalized, no defaulter can choose as to which act they can be charged under. Once you're found to be in breach, then you will be placed before the court. And as the CEO and the legal officer would have narrated earlier, the police, just like the EPA, don't just go and charge persons at first instance of a call. The first thing they do, they respond to these nuisance reports, and the perpetrator should be warned to desist from such breaches. Now, if when the police left, as you were highlighting, they went back to their continuance of breaking the law, then the police has the authority to arrest and seize those equipment and charge persons at the earliest opportunity. That is using our current summary jurisdiction offenses. But for me, I cannot be more than happier to see this fiat in place as fast as possible. I know the commissioner and the admin aspect, the admin team is really working in collaboration with the EPA, so we can really bring some comfort to citizens, because it is not easy. It is not easy. You have these 80-something-year-old, they will have starved the time, they need to be at peace in their own dwelling. Sometimes some of them are on medication, they can't rest during the day. You understand? And especially some of those hot spot or hot, I would say the timing is on the weekends, from Friday nights straight into Sunday nights. And these things that persons have to know is that don't feel that the police is not doing anything, don't feel that the EPA is not doing anything. We're doing a lot of work behind the scenes. So that is why this program come out today. So you would not, when you're caught, you cannot say you're not aware. It is everybody's business to become aware, because nuisance is everybody's business. Just as domestic violence, just as trafficking in person, you hear something, see something, you do not have to be afraid. Just call the 911, give the direction, the police will show up there. And as it is, if the police comes and the person, the victim do not want to come out, as would have highlighted, because they want to maintain this good neighborly relationship. Once the police hears the music playing, the police, as it is, can write a statement based on what they would have responded to, what they observed, and what they do as a result of it. And the persons can be charged while we're awaiting the fiat. So it's not like the fiat is fully in place to give the police the authority to utilize the EPA Act. But the EPA can charge you as it is. independently until the Fiat and the Guyana Police Force source the authority to prefer charges.
Penultimately, and I want to have the take of each of you on the panel on this issue. So, given where we're going and given where we prefer to go, let's start with you, Mr. Taylor. Should there be, and there seems to be, the niggleish part seems to be noise nuisance as it relates to mostly in residential areas, especially music. Should there be public spaces where persons can have those prescribed noises that should not be able to impact others? And even for those who are operating industrial businesses, how should we then maybe go about dealing with them in terms of being able to reduce what they're emitting?
It should also include commercial areas. There are operators, in addition to the residential and entertainment districts, in commercial areas, outside of the industrial areas, they too emit a lot of noise pollution. In time to come, with continued enforcement, the net outside of the focus group or the focus area presently will extend to these areas. At this time, we're looking at the hotspots, the more prevalent violators, the more prevalent areas or clusters of complaints. There will come a time when your nuisance call may come from some areas that we never even care to look into at this time. The real back streets that seem to be getting away. But rest assured, the public out there, we will get to you. Your time is coming. You will be all.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Taylor. And
Yes, in terms of the persons in a particular area so that they can emit that noise without affecting others, I would like to see that. I know we're not there yet, but in the meantime, persons can, if you're in a residential area, you have your bar already invested, maybe you could look at investing a little bit more just to maybe enclose your bar if it's open, maybe enclose your bar, look at using maybe carpets and other encasement so that you can decrease some of the sound that is emitting from your bar in consideration of your neighbors and such.
For me, yes, there are places, you have the national parks, you have the stadium. It's not like the national stadium. It's not within living areas of persons. So I would encourage business persons who have, as my colleague would have indicated, who would have heavily invested in their business to do a bit more investment in closures, make the effort to make the place soundproof, build casement where they can store these bazookas and these big boxes so that the sound could not or would not emanate to affect your neighbors or persons in the environment. And as she would have indicated, use the mats, the rubber mats. If they place these boxes on the rubber mats, it may tend to mitigate the noise, control the level of volume of noise going on,
and even the vibrations.
and the vibrations. And one of the things, invest in one of these meters. It's on Amazon. It is for sale, so you can be able to monitor the noise yourself while you're there. You understand? So when the call or the reports are made, and the police respond, or the EPA officials respond, they can synchronize, and you will see whether you're within the decibel range or whether you're not. Become familiar, arm yourself with the app, see what it says, right? Edify, ignorant of the law is no excuse. You understand? The app is online. Download it. I would hope that this program would have brought awareness to not only the proprietors of these businesses, but to the public as a whole. And all those mini buses and the hire cars, that feel that if they're coming in the mornings, in the wee hours of the mornings, I just be affected, right? They come through the street and they're washing on the music and they're just disturbing the neighbors. And who can you call? The police can't be everywhere, but the police aren't trained. So my final words is that maintain the law, maintain the peace in the community. Think about when you get to 80, if you would want to be lying on your bed and it is vibrating your feeble body, right? Or when your wife makes these young babies or have these babies jumping out of the sleep, as my colleague would have indicated earlier, it can affect the child one way or the other. So in my closing words, I would encourage persons to ensure that the noise is at an acceptable level to you and come outside. See if you're hearing it outside. If you're hearing it outside, then it affects someone. Right? Once you're hearing it outside of your home, much more of your home still, that means it is affecting somebody else. And we're coming, look out. We're coming after you. Those are my closing words.
Thanks a lot, Coach Super.
Thank you once again, Stan. As we speak, Guyana, we don't have any zone gazetted area where people can go and have what you call a sound off with their music set, right? Because as you know, our national park, we have some species there that when you blast music, it can affect them. But person can go in areas where it won't affect plants, animals, or other human beings if they want to have a song off. I know such areas exist in places like developed countries like America and stuff, but I know we are getting there. For my last words, the collaboration between us, the Guyana Police Force, and EPA is a positive step in the right direction. Together, working hand in hand, we'll be able to more effectively and efficiently combat noise nuisance in our community. And I look forward to the day when we can prosecute persons under the EPA Act. Because as you know, the draconian fine alone with a small imprisonment sentence, that alone will be a deterrent to people. Thank you, Stan.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Redmond.
All right, I think this has been an interesting session, Stan. I would encourage our viewers to stay tuned to our pages, visit the EPA's website as well as our Facebook page, follow us on Instagram, and be aware of how we are moving as it relates to noise management. Please be considerate of others, turn down your volume where necessary, and put appropriate measures in place. Every Guyanese is entitled to a quality of life where their health and well-being is safeguarded. So I encourage each person listening to do their part to assure that they are protected from noise pollution and that others are also not exposed to noise that may affect them. So we look forward to the continued collaboration with the Guyana Police Force. We know that it will bear fruit and that many people will rejoice and will hold us accountable to deliver all the things we are outlining here. So we remain committed to the effort.
Thanks a lot, Ms. Redmond. Legal mind from EPA, Ms. Parks.
Yes, well, given the fact we don't have a specific area for noise, per se, or people to operate freely or to blast their music as their wish, while in the future we may see those areas designated or zones for particular commercial activities, I would definitely say that people should be considerate in playing music and remember that everyone is entitled to their comfort. And you should be very considerate when you play music and remember that, well, you could be fined. We will go to court to prosecute in some instances. So, in going forward, I just look forward to the collaborative effort between the Guyana Police Force and the EPA, as this is a threefold exercise. We're currently in the training stage, and after the training stage is completed, we'll have the following two stages, which will operate conjunctively. We'll have the sourcing of the necessary equipment to the Guyana Police Force and the enforcement activity, and that everyone, our members of the public, should look forward for these the enforcement and us bringing comfort as the two agencies, the Guyana Police Force and the EPA, in bringing some sense of relief against noise pollution. I know several people may be optimistic about it, and some people would say this is wishful thinking, but with the presence of the hem of the EPA and the Guyana Police Force, this is not wishful thinking. This is something we're guarantee will happen. We're taking all the necessary steps to have this enforced. So as a legal officer and working with the head of my agency and in working with the Guyana Police Force and having a conversation with their head, this is something that we guarantee will move forward in a positive light, and this collaboration is something you'll see effectively going forward. We're not just here to just talk about noise management or noise pollution. This is just again visual thinking. We have started each stage of training, and our next stage is implementation. I guarantee the public that implementation will happen, and we do look forward for their also collaborative effort, because a lot of time we can't do it on our own. The public is also important in enforcing and helping us to tackle noise management and noise nuisance.
Awesome. And of course, finally, Mr. Singh, Search Paul Singh, head of complaints.
Well, there's nothing much left for me to say, but
You said it all, huh?
yes, but I echo the similar sentiments as my colleagues here. This is a work in progress, right? I urge persons out there, viewers, everything can be done right away. We have to work collaboratively to get this issue fixed, and this is a commitment by the agency and the Guyana Police Force that we are willing to work with entertainers, we are willing to work with defaulters and the complainants as well, to bring noise nuisance down or to reduce it significantly. So rest assured, this is a work in progress, and you will see more of us out in the field investigating your complaints, right? And it is our intention, our hope to one day have a country that is free of noise nuisance. So with that little word, I just want to say thanks, and I really wish that the public out there, will continue to work with us and work with the Guyana Police Force. Make reports, our information is out there, we have our numbers, all the information that you need is out there. So you can reach out to us, reach out to the Guyana Police Force, and rest assured, noise nuisance will be tackled across the country. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Mr. It's Search Paul Singh, who is the Senior Environmental Officer and Head of Complaints down with EPA. Along with the other members of the panel, we had the Legal Officer, Ms. Sharifa Parks. We also had the Senior Environmental Officer and the Head of Technical Services, and none other than Tashana Redmond. And from the police side, we had the Deputy Commander of Region Division number 3, which is Superintendent Khalid Mandel. We've also had the Woman Superintendent of Police and the officer in charge of the Court Superintendent Officer, Regional Division 4A, none other than Shalon Daniels. And we've also had the manager of the Juliet Griffith Daycare Center, Woman Sergeant Kenny Haney, on our panel. And certainly last but not least, we have had our superintendent, Marlon Taylor, with us sharing about how we can be able, in terms of this partnership with the EPA and the Guyana Police Force, seek to tackle noise nuisance. And do remember, public, noise nuisance is not just about the playing of music, but it is also being addressing those commercial areas where businesses are actually operating so that they can come in compliance. And we do reiterate, as a matter of fact, I do reiterate, get the act, go on the EPA website and get the act, edify yourself as to what is coming and what is already there, so that you will be in the know and you will be able to reduce noise, when it is from your business, when it's entertainment purposes, and even when it comes to the affecting of our senior citizens, our children, and those who are studying. Thanks a lot for joining us on this special edition of The Police and You. I am Stan Gavaya on behalf of Technical Credits, as a matter of fact, to Corporal Avenger Rajbali. Stan Gavaya saying thanks for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day.